What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the Fighting Game Tutorial Series, we are going to be going over improving our patch notes and news menu. So when we come in, we're on this initial page. When we go past that page, we will bring up the patch notes or the news pop-up right here. And usually I just press backspace and get rid of this at the start of the episode, but I want to actually improve this today because first of all, the way I set it up, you could only exit out of it by pressing the back button. I also want to be able to exit out of it by selecting a close button on the screen or clicking on it with the mouse. We want to make everything as simple for the player to understand as possible. That way they don't get frustrated not knowing how to navigate the menu. We are going to be adding navigation to this widget today because we may want to navigate to another button on here. Say part of the patch notes we have like view the full patch notes, view a trailer, or if this is a news pop-up, maybe view a URL or a website that contains more information about this. A lot of games do that, and so we would want to be able to navigate between those buttons. So this is going to make it where we actually can use these patch notes or this news pop-up for more than just displaying information. It can actually navigate the user to different areas. So anyway, that's what we're going to be covering today. If you want to get caught up in the series, I'll link you to the entire fighting game playlist right here in the top right corner. You can check out how we did things like our character selection screen, our loading screens, as well as our hitbox and combat. If you're only interested in the news pop-up and the patch notes pop-up, that's perfectly fine. I do recommend that you watch this episode in the top right corner right here before this current episode, because that episode is the initial one where we set up this pop-up, and we will be building off of that logic today. Let's go ahead and get started. So this is a code and blueprint tutorial series. There's no code today though because we're only worried about the blueprints and the widgets. So we need to go to our news pop-up widget. So blueprints, widgets, menus, news pop-up for me, but whatever you called it, of course, is fine. We want to go to the design review of this widget, and we want to go to the canvas panel that we have that is holding all of our other elements that are currently on it. And I'm going to add a button to that canvas panel. Standard button, and I called it close pop-up button. Now, I wanted to put it in the bottom right of the actual pop-up itself. So for that, I anchored it to the center anchor, and then gave it these positions and these sizes, as well as this alignment. Remember that the alignment changes where the pivot point of this widget or this element is. So if I have my alignment at 0, 0, the positions and anchor that I assigned are actually using the top left or the origin of this button to determine where it should be, but we want it to use the center of the button. So if we use 0.5 and 0.5, that's half height, half width. So the center of that button is now the pivot point. For the style of the button, I have button styles that I've set up earlier in the series. So my button bar 1 is my regular gray button when it is not selected. You can see my image size here. I have my hovered, which is this button P1 hover variation one, and it is this blue button here. And we have our pressed style here, which is button P1 SNH, or button player 1 selected and hovered. And I didn't put my press sound and hovered sound, but I did in the blueprint. We should actually assign them here as well, just so that we know exactly what we're working with. So my press sound is confirm 1, and my hovered sound is tick. Now, I didn't change anything else about this button. It is a standard button, but make sure it is a variable because we are going to need to access it in the graph, so we want to have that there. Now, another thing I want to do is add text to the button because right now it's just the button itself. I added a text element to the button, and I already have one. It won't let you put more than one element on a button widget, but once you drag that on there, you'll get a piece of text here. I called this the CPUB text, which just stands for close pop-up button text, because I called my button the close pop-up button. So we have close pop-up button, and then the text is close pop-up button text, or CPUB text. The text doesn't need to be a variable because we don't need to change it in this case. I set the text to just say close, but you could say exit, whatever you want. For my font, I set it to bold italic with a size of 36, outline size of 2, but all this stuff is completely up to you. I'm just showing you what I have so you know how mine is set up. So there we go, those are all the changes we need on our design view of the widget. The next thing we need to do is go into the graph, and we will go to our event graph. Now previously, for our news pop-up or our patch notes pop-up, we had event construct, and then we had our return P1 and all the behavior in return P1. We were also calling the set news data function, which was actually determining what information we were displaying to the user based on the latest news data or latest patch notes. So everything that's not highlighted in this view right now, so essentially these nodes that I'm circling between with my mouse and this node over here, are the things we're adding in today's episode. So the first set of behavior that we need to add is the ability to move across elements on this widget. Even though for now we only have the close option, again, we could have more options than that, and supporting it is not a bad idea. It's a good thing to have more features, even if we're not doing it at the moment, especially because this doesn't add a lot of complexity, and it definitely is not slowing the game down. The news pop-up is open only at a very specific time, and it's not going to cause any lag by adding this. Even if you don't end up using it, you can always take it away. So we want to call listen for input action, and we did this in the previous episode for our return P1. So essentially return P1 was the backspace key on our keyboard, the B button on an Xbox controller, essentially what is going to back us out of the current menu we're in. And we were using that to close the news pop-up. However, I'm also going to want to listen for my left and right inputs as well as my confirm input. Confirm is like the enter key or the A button on an Xbox controller. So listen for input action. Target is self because we're referring to this widget. For the action name, I know mine is menu left P1, but you can find it by going into the edit project settings, scrolling down to input, and then finding your action mapping. If you have enhanced input, you can use that behavior as well. And I have a few episodes on that if needed, but for now I'm just using my standard input actions, and I have menu left P1. That is A on the keyboard or gamepad left thumbstick left. And we're also going to need menu right, which is menu right P1. That's D on the keyboard and game left thumbstick right. Finally, we will need confirm P1, menu confirm P1. That is 1 on the keyboard or gamepad face button bottom, which is the A button on an Xbox controller. So we're going to need all 3 of these, so make sure you recognize and copy your names directly. So menu left P1 in the action name. The event type is going to be IE pressed. This means when this action, input action, is pressed, we will trigger what's in the callback. So that's what I have in this node right here, and then I drag off the callback and type add custom event, and then I can call this event whatever I want. You see in my current behavior, I called it left P1. So essentially, we press left on the keyboard, left P1 gets called, and then what do we want to do? Well, we would want to move the selection to the proper spot on the news pop-up or the patch notes pop-up. We are going to have a function for that, but let's go ahead and set up our listen for input action on menu right P1 as well. So same node, menu right P1 instead of menu left P1. We're still using pressed. And the callback is going to go to a different event. This one I'm just calling right P1. Lastly, we need one for confirmation, right? Our selection we're choosing. If we're not pressing back, we can press the A button or the 1 key on our keyboard to confirm that we want to close the pop-up. That is menu confirm P1 for me. It is happening on press. Now consume, we actually want to check on this one. You'll see consume is not checked on the other ones. Consume means only this widget that we are listening for will be able to take that input. Once that input is found on this widget, other widgets will not receive that input even if they are listening for it. They will just ignore it, discard it. This is important because if we don't consume during the confirm, then when we come into our main menu here, we can press the confirm button, which will automatically bring us into the story mode, since our story mode button also uses the same button as the confirmation. There are plenty of ways around this, and we've actually handled a few in the series, but marking this as consume will solve the problem on its own, so I recommend just checking consume and not worrying about anything else. Now we need to call back off of this one as well, and I just called this one confirm P1. So those are all of our events that we are listening to. We have to make the actual functions for the things we want to be able to do. Move selection, display the currently selected button, and confirm selection. So the first one we're going to make is move selection. So add a new function, call it move selection. After you make it, compile and save. This will allow you to add parameters to it. We are going to want to add two input parameters. One is called direction, one is called play sound effects. So you press this little plus to add, and then I call it direction for the first one, and that is an integer. And the other one is play sound effects, play SFX, and that is a boolean. So there you go. Once we have that, we can go into move selection. And in here, really all we want to do is determine the direction that the player is trying to move and determine if they're able to move that way. So if they're too far to the left or too far to the right, if there are no selections for them to move to, we don't allow them to move. Otherwise, we allow them to move. It's really that simple. To know where we're at already, we need a variable to track that. So I've added a variable called current P1 selection right here. This is also an integer. So current P1 selection default value is 0, and when we move, this value would be updated. And we're also going to need one more variable, which is called max selections. This is the maximum number of selections that we have on this widget. So add another variable, call it max selections, make it an integer as well, and the max selections default value is 1. There's one item at the current time, and that is our close button. Now we want to take our direction that we added. That's the input parameter that we added. So assume direction just means left or right, and -1 refers to left, +1 refers to right. So if we take our current P1 selection, get it, and then integer plus integer, or just plus, depending on if you're in Unreal Engine 4 or Unreal Engine 5. If you're in Unreal Engine 5, you can just use this add utilities operators add right here. But if you're in Unreal Engine 4, it will say int plus int, or I believe it is actually integer plus integer. But we're going to go with this one right here. We just want to have simple plus node here, and we are going to add our direction into it. So that's what we have right here. Our current selection is 0, so if we're trying to move to the left, we are going to get -1 because the left is -1. Right is +1, so if we're adding 0 plus 1, we get a result of 1. Those are our left and right movements. We need to make sure that current P1 selections is less than max selections and also greater than the minimum value. Basically, it fits within the bounds that we defined on this widget. So we need to grab max selections and get that and make sure it is greater than the result of current P1 selection plus the direction, like we have here. That's these nodes right here. We also need to make sure that the result of current P1 selection plus the direction is greater than the minimum, so greater than. For the bottom value here, we want to use -1. -1 is 1 below our minimum index, which is 0, so that's something we have to be higher than. So now we should have all of these nodes right here. The two greater than nodes that we have, we want to put them into an AND statement. And boolean. The reason for this is because both of these conditions have to be true if we want to proceed with moving a player's current selection. Then this AND can get brought into a branch, which determines if it's true or false. Only if it's true do we actually want to move the selection. So if it's true, we want to take the result of current P1 selection plus the direction and set current P1 selection to that value. So simply just update it to the new value because the movement was deemed as valid. Now there's a few more things we have to do in here, but let's go back to the event graph and actually call this function now that we have move selection. So in left P1 and right P1, the events we made earlier, we want to call move selection. And for the direction on left P1, I want to put -1. For play sound effects, I want to check it because when the player actually presses the input to move this, we do want to play the sound effect indicating that they have moved. For right P1, we want to use move selection again. This time we're going to make the direction +1 because we're moving to the right, and we do want to check play sound effects again. Make sure you plug them in like I have here, and now your function will be called. Let's go back to move selection and take a look at the next thing. We can display the selection to the user. And the way we do that is by determining what button they're currently on using the current P1 selection that we just set and changing the style of that button accordingly. So we want to make a new function here, add function, and I call this one display selection. Display selection looks like this. So we have only one button right now, but I've decided to make this scalable so that we can increase it as we wish. So I'm going to grab my close pop-up button. This is why we need it to be a variable. The close pop-up button, that is the new button that we added. And I'm going to drag off of that and make array out of it. So this is going to make an array of buttons, because if we have more than one button, we're going to need to loop through them to determine which one is currently selected. Again, we only have one right now, but we're working toward the future. If you do have multiple buttons on your patch notes news screen, you can press add pin right here to add more options. Now we can drag off of the array and get for each loop, just like this. Again, this is going to loop through every element within this array, and we can perform an action at every single index. It will return the element we are looping through, the index it is looping through, and it will tell us when it's completed. That's what we have here. Right now, close pop-up button is index 0. So when we're looping, array index is going to be index 0 at the start of the loop. That's the first one we're going to loop through. And so it is going to be equal to our current P1 selection variable. This means we want to display it as the hovered or selected button at the current time. If these indices are not equal, if the array index does not equal the current P1 selection, that means the button we are looking at in the loop is not equal to the button that the player is currently hovering or selecting. So we want to reset it back to that gray button, not the blue button. So we need to determine if these integers are equal. So if you drag off of array index and type not equal or exclamation mark equal, either will work. You'll get this node here, and you want to plug in your current P1 selection into it. Then we're going to bring the return of that node into a branch, just like this, and we're going to set the style based on if that's true or false. So we're going to drag off of our array element, and I know it's really far down here because these nodes are huge, and we're going to call it set style. So array element, set style, and variables appearance. And then we can right click on the style pin and split struct pin. Now we'll have all these different types of styles. We want to split style normal. Split struct pin, and then we'll get it looking like this. You'll notice I didn't really change anything in most of the default settings. What I actually changed was the style normal image. I want to make sure I set that back to my default color of button bar 1. Remember we set that up on the button here in the style. Under normal button bar 1, we want to do that as well. Button variation 1, and that's actually all we need to do for the normal, but we want to also handle the style hovered and style pressed so that our mouse input can go over it, and it will give feedback for that as well. So we can split the struct pin on style hovered, and we can use our button P1 hover variation 1. Then we have style pressed. We can right click and split that struct pin and change the style pressed image to button P1 selected. To improve this even further, we can look at the two bottom nodes above target, which are style press sound and style hovered sound, and we can right click and split those struct pins and then add sound effects for our mouse hovering and pressing them as well. So for me, style press sound is confirm 1, and style hovered sound is tick. I'm going to delete this new node because I already have this one here. I just want to show you how you could set up that entire thing on your own. We're basically going to do the same thing and just change a few of the styles for if it is the selected option. Remember, the first one was if current P1 selection was not equal to this for loop element. That's why we set these styles. However, if it's false, that means it is the button the player is hovering or selecting. So we want to set style again off the same array element that we did last time. And this time, for our style normal image, we can use whatever we want. I'm actually going to change this. It was selected before. I'm going to change it to button P1 hover var 1, just to stay consistent with what I had on this style setting right here. But it doesn't really matter as long as you have the right image for your game. Of course, you can use whatever you want. So that is for the normal image, right? Because we're not hovering it with the mouse, but when we come in here, it is the selected button. It's the button that the player is on with their input device, the keyboard or their controller. Now, since it is set to hovered by default, the hovered image, I'm going to make my hovered and selected image SNH here. So now when we are to hover over it, we'll get this little blue border as well, just to indicate that we are in fact hovering over it, but it's also selected by the input device. For the style pressed, I'm using the button P1 selected, which is actually going to get rid of that blue fill. Button P1 selected is just a blue outline like this. That will be if you clicked it with the mouse, but it is also currently selected with the input device. After this, we have our style press sound and style hovered sound. Again, it's going to be confirm 1 and tick for me. So now our button and any buttons that we add to this should be displayed properly on this news pop-up or patch notes pop-up. We need to call the display selection function to actually make this happen, which we are doing in move selection. So go back to that function. After setting current P1 selection, we can now call display selection right here. And that's good to go. Now the last thing we want to do is determine if we should play a sound effect when we actually move the selection. So remember, the sound effects that we set up in display selection were with the mouse. When we're moving selection, when we're calling that function, we're moving it with our input device, such as our keyboard or controller. So we want to play a sound effect on our own, and I'm going to drag off of my play sound effects and bring that into a branch, and only if this is true, we want to play our sound effect. Now you could use play sound 2D. If you have been following the series, we set up a custom play sound 2D that we can call, that takes into account the sound effect volume and music volume. So we're going to call our custom play sound 2D. But that's not required if you don't have that. We're going to use our tick sound effect here, and that's what we have here. And this is our entire move selection function. The last thing we need to do is our confirm selection. So let's make a new function right now and call it confirm selection. It does not have any parameters or anything. So once you've created it, you can go into it. And this is a very simple function. We want to play the sound effect anytime confirm selection is called, even if it's the selection that we're already on. Custom play sound 2D to play here, and I'm making it confirm 1. Then we have to determine the behavior each one of the buttons on this pop-up is pressed or is confirmed. First of all, determining what is the current selection. So current P1 selection, get that. Drag off of it and do a switch on int for switch on integer. Add a pin for all of your potential cases. For me, I only have the close button, so I only have one case, so index 0 is fine, but of course you add as many as you need. And what is the behavior that we want to do if we press the close button, if we confirm that? Well, we want to close the pop-up, and we actually already have that behavior in the event graph, that return P1 event that we bound to our return P1 input action. So we can quite literally just call this event here, return P1. You can also search for it and get it to pop up, return P1. And just drag off of index 0 into that. You can also drag the default into that if you want. Because if you have more selections and somehow your current P1 selection gets to a value that isn't shown on the switch, the default will pick it up and then it will close the pop-up automatically. Once you have this function, let's go back to the event graph. And in our listen for input action, where we were setting up the confirm P1 event, we want to now call confirm selection that we just set up here. And it will look like this. We also want to have the buttons on the news pop-up or the patch notes pop-up automatically set their style appropriately. After I trigger all my listen for input actions behavior at the end of event construct, I'm just going to call move selection again. I'm going to give it a direction of 0, so it won't actually modify where the player is currently selecting or what button they're on. And I'm not going to place sound effects. So either move selection or display selection will work for now. So once you do this and you come into your game, then your close button should automatically be hovered and in the right state. And then if you press the confirm button, it should get rid of it. Now to add mouse control as well, we can simply go to the designer view, go to our close pop-up button, scroll down to the bottom with the events and go to on pressed, add that event. It will add it to your graph. You can bring it over to return P1 and we can organize this just like that. Put the on press close pop-up button in here. So as long as these are calling the same functions, you'll be good to go. We will be able to click on the close button to close it now. So if we actually go over to it, you're set. So anyway guys, that's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do. I'm really grateful for that. I want to give a huge shout out to my Patreon, YouTube membership, and Discord subscription supporters. You guys are awesome, and I'm so grateful for all the love and support. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I would be happy to help you out, and that support is completely free. Anyway guys, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye guys.